Okay, hi everyone. This is Sasha Hodler, and you're on the HODLCast. Today is July 13th, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Sam Arms, and he is the founder of it's called Real Politech LLC. And I met him, we met for the first time at the grand opening of Block Spaces, which is kind of Tampa's premier area for anything blockchain related. And I was really impressed with this young man. And now even more so over the last couple months, he's been doing a lot of work around policy and crypto. So maybe Sam, you could give a little bit of your background and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on, Sasha. So my background is I'm a recent graduate from the University of South Florida in Tampa. So I went there for a degree in financing economics. When I went there, I kind of got involved in like an Intel program, which is like CIA, FBI stuff. And while I was there, I got entered into a program to report to USSOCOM and do presentations for them.
What kind of reporting? Like what?
Well, so we had a couple of topics, but I ended up choosing the topic of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So they had a lot of like issues that they needed help on. And I actually, back in high school was when I kind of got introduced to like Bitcoin. I had some random friend come up to me. He's like, "Hey, Sam, I got a Bitcoin. You want one?" I was like, "I don't know what that is, but sure." So I kind of had like some kind of familiarity with it. And so when I did the presentation for SOCOM, and they essentially contracted us out to do that, that's when I really started doing like a lot of heavy in-depth research into it. So that was really like, I think, my big major push to really understanding not just like the industry and technology, but also what the government was worried about.
Yeah, and what was their attitude towards it? Like, what did you find? Did they just not know a whole lot about it, or were they negative towards it, or?
Yeah, so I think in one sense they had a pretty open mind, but their big to was SOCOM's J36 unit, which was terror and threat finance. So their biggest fear was that it was going to be used for money laundering, terrorism. There had been actually a recent case when we were doing our report of a kid here in Virginia, here in the U.S. in Virginia. They've written a paper coaching ISIS on how to use Bitcoin to fund lone wolf attacks across not just the United States, but in Europe too, right? So you had like all these kind of isolated incidents that caught their eye and said, hey, we don't know a lot about this, but what we do know, especially of course with Silk Road, they're like, we think it might be using for just bad stuff.
Mm-hmm. So we see the reputation that Bitcoin always gets. I just saw the article earlier today that the Russian hack on Hillary Clinton, they used Bitcoin. It's like,
they
and then
really?
Pony on Twitter was like, "Oh yeah, we have a real problem with kitchen knives." I didn't see the tweet; I just heard about it. But like saying basically, Bitcoin being the means that people use is no different than cash, but the government loves to hone in on it and be like, oh, they use Bitcoin, we better be worried about Bitcoin. But
yeah, and I think, so to be fair in the one sense, I know that's one of the reasons Bitcoin gained popularity, right, is criminals said, hey, this is going to be an awesome new vehicle. But what we've seen now is actually Bitcoin, and this is from chain analysis, and this is what I've been telling a lot of people. Like I think in 2013, they said 30% of Bitcoin transactions were used for criminal activity. Today, it's less than 1%, right?
oh wow.
Yeah. So I think at one point in time, it might have been a vehicle for some of that stuff. But yeah, the same foundational principles there. This is what we ended up telling SOCOM, is we were like, listen, first of all, Bitcoin's on the blockchain, right? So you can actually track most of this stuff, or you can at least see the transaction. Second of all, there was no real incentive, say, for big people like drug cartels to get involved in Bitcoin because they were doing fine as is. So there's no incentive for them to use Bitcoin because they're perfectly fine just dealing in pallets of cash. Because one, it's technically more private, but then two, what's the need of transferring all that money into Bitcoin when there's so much volatility, especially at the time there's a lot of volatility when there's just no need.
And it's not like they can buy, they can't use it to buy a lot of goods and services right now. Whereas with their cash, they can, it's more easy to integrate cash into their, to make it useful to them.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we ended up telling SOCOM. I mean, our biggest thing was like, listen, this could be an issue, but one, you need to look at the benefits. Two, you need to look at the current financial system, because the way that's set up, we used Wachovia as an example, and it's kind of a fun classic example, but Wachovia was complicit in dealing with drug cartels because they just wanted the extra funds and money. And they just got fined like a couple $1 million, right? And that was it, right? They were just got a slap on the wrist, and they were actively complying with these drug cartels. So we were like, you can worry about Bitcoin, but you might want to look at the current financial institutions because they're currently doing just as much bad stuff.
Yeah, or probably way, way more than what, small little Bitcoin does.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my big, like, first deep dive into Bitcoin. So after that, I went to work for the Department of State up in DC. So there I was with the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. And they had actually hired me on specifically because on my resume, I had done work for SOCOM, and they said, we have no idea about any of this Bitcoin stuff. Show us what we need to be looking at. And so one of my tasks, although I had multiple tasks while I was there, one of my big tasks was developing for them some of the first documents on blockchain, Bitcoin, what it is, specifically, what are the states doing, right? What's from the policy side, what states are doing to either ban it or promote it? What are other countries doing, like China, the European Union? And what are other federal agencies doing? So the State Department seemed to be trying to play catch up in a lot of ways, and I attended a lot of, there's like a congressional blockchain caucus, and I had to go to a few of those meetings to just kind of report back to my bosses at the State Department, tell them what's going on congressional level, and all kinds of fun stuff. So that I was there for, I think, about 4 months, and that was the summer of 2017. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Right before they probably had to have a very different attitude the summer of 2018, I bet.
Yeah. yeah, I know. So then after the State Department, then I worked up in Tallahassee. I worked for a state representative for one of Florida's legislative sessions, which not a lot of people know, but Florida's legislative sessions just 60 days. So I was there collectively, how long was I there? I think about 2 to 3 months. And I was just learning the legislative process, helping the representative that I was working for and his assistant just kind of go through the paperwork, kind of all the dirty work that nobody wants to do. That was me. I was doing that. But I got to know, the process, what all is all involved. Got to sit in on like all the meetings behind closed doors, about people advocating for bills that they do or don't want. So I got a real political feel as for what's going on in Tallahassee.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I think it's something that unless you have that experience that you just described, you really have no way of knowing what that process of passing the bills is like. Are there any notable ones that you want to highlight, or is it something you can't talk about?
Notable bills, I mean, the big thing at the time, which is funny because it's resurfacing, was about Lake Okeechobee and all that green algae that you're seeing, which I know this isn't like Bitcoin or blockchain related, but it is Florida related, right? It's like you're seeing the same blooms, algae blooms happen like right now. And while I was there, you had lobbyists from both sides of industry, the argument. You had environmentalists who had one solution, you had all trying to push legislators on what specifically they wanted them to do, right? And obviously nothing substantial got done because still this year we're dealing with the same problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice. And did they have you done any work around Bitcoin with the Florida legislators?
No, I didn't really touch Bitcoin while I was there. Obviously, I talked to a few occasional people. I even talked to some lobbying firms about being interested in Bitcoin. I had some people say, would you be willing to possibly come work for us in the future and be into this field? But nobody really knew much about it. And even up in Tallahassee, it was just kind of like, yeah, magic internet money, yeah, sure, okay, or dark money, why would I want to touch that?
Mhm.
So I mean, especially up in Tallahassee, I mean, just like any government institution, state, federal, local, whatever, everyone just kind of like, cool,
Isn't
right?
it so? I find it so weird when I walk into a room and people don't know anything about Bitcoin because I'm so used to being surrounded by people that live and breathe Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and it's my whole life. And then all of a sudden you walk somewhere and they've never heard of Bitcoin. It's like, oh, how have you not heard of this? But it's a lot. Most people still haven't, I guess, or I don't know about most, but it's still kind of. I guess we're still early here.
Yeah, and I think since the run up to 20,000, I think a large chunk of people know the name, they know the word. Anything after that is just kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever. But they at least know what it is, right? It's not just, at least they've heard of it now. So I mean, slowly but surely.
Yeah. I think in Florida we can pay our taxes in Bitcoin now. Didn't that happen a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago now? The county tax collector office here in Tampa, I believe, will allow us to pay tax in Bitcoin. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Florida seems to be a more a sort of forward state on its regulatory policies, I'd say. Or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know about the Tampa Bay area. I know Seminole County, right, and they're kind of the famous one. Said they're going to start accepting Bitcoin payments through for taxes, and they're
Is
going to be
it
using
straight
BitPay
Bitcoin or is it going to be through some like BitPay or
through
something?
BitPay through BitPay.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
So actually, yeah, it's not like I can give them a paper wallet and say, "Here's my Bitcoin."
I
It's
see.
still just
Okay.
through BitPay, so it's just using it as a vehicle. Um, but
Yeah.
that the guy who did that is apparently super awesome. He was on the Henry Rain show, which I'm sure you're aware of,
Oh, yeah. Nice.
and he was interviewed. Apparently, all of the people in his tax building are allowed to be armed with guns because he considers them like officers. So he's like a super awesome dude. But here's what's funny, right? Because right now I'm obviously with my current company, I'm trying and have taken all my past experience, right? I'm trying to make Florida the most friendly Bitcoin blockchain state in the whole United States, right? So that's my goal. What that guy in Seminole County did is he created a lot of conversation throughout in government to the point where I had a meeting at the CFO's office just this week, educating some of the people in the CFO's office about Bitcoin and blockchain and what we're hoping to do. And they mentioned the Seminole County tax collector's office and said, yeah, I mean, apparently that guy's taken it. And so it's caused their office to do a lot of intensive research because they said if a county office is doing it, man, we got to play some catch up. So it's funny
Hmm.
how little things like that actually do, even if it's not seen, they have a big impact. And that guy has actually helped me with what I'm doing because now when I'm advocating for it, they're like, oh yeah, well I can't be too bad. The county's collecting taxes in it, so I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, woo, yeah they are.
Hmm. So what kind of information were you imparting to the CFO's office?
So the biggest thing is, I mean, and here in Florida, I don't know if you're aware, you probably are, but the CFO, first of all, we have a CFO's raise, right? Our chief financial officer has now become an elected position. It didn't used to always be that way. It was long ago, but then they made it so it's not an elected position. It's just an appointed position, but now it's back to being elected. All right, so you have the current guy, Jimmy Patronis, who's running on the Republican ticket, and then you have another guy, Jeremy Ring, who's running on the Democratic ticket for the CFO's position. And they've actually kind of made cryptocurrency a campaign issue. So the CFO, it really became a big deal when he, about a month ago, I guess now, issued a letter from his office talking about setting up a position for a crypto czar. right? Which would be a position to essentially strictly regulate cryptocurrency, right? And so that sent off a lot of red flags in the community. And it's still, I think, having some ripple effects because I'm still talking to people who actually had no idea that the letter was even issued. And I'm sending it to them. They're like, holy cow, right? That could affect my business. That could be incredibly bad.
Oh yeah, one bad piece of legislation, like look at New York. It's what you're doing is very, very important, I believe.
Yes. So we I believe now 2 weeks ago, hosted an event for legislators in the Tampa Bay area. And we actually invited someone from the CFO's office down. So the director of the Tampa Bay area for the CFO's office came in. And what we did is we educated the legislators first on the basics of blockchain and Bitcoin, right? Tell them what it is. Because like I said, the majority of these people, they have no clue, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not in their purview, right? I mean, it's something we got to educate them about. So that was one big thing we did. And then the second thing is we actually looked at different policies. And I kind of went over, I said what the New York model is, which is something we didn't want to do. So like I told them what the bit license was, the process of it getting passed, and then all the negative headlines that came about the bit exodus, right, that happened from New York, all to the point that even this year, actually, some lawmakers in New York are questioning whether they want to still have the bit license. And so we went over stuff, but then we went over what we might want to do, right? So I went over Wyoming, the bill that they passed, which mainly had to deal with like consumption tokens. We talked about New Hampshire and Alaska, which messed with like the money transmitter license. And then, of course, out in Arizona and Nevada, where they were talking about digital blockchain signatures and just giving them some legal backing, I guess. So
I've been doing a lot with Wyoming. They have that Wyoming LLC or the Blockchain Coalition, and they've been helping me with some of my clients registering new businesses. And there's so many good reasons to register an LLC in Wyoming beyond just the utility token function. I love that state, but I didn't know when you said New Hampshire and Alaska with the money transmission. What's going on there?
So in New Hampshire, so you have two things. So first in Alaska, right? Because a money transmitter license is obviously just a barrier to entry, right? So if you're
for anyone not familiar with it, it's basically every different state requires this license if you're going to take someone else's money and sell it to someone else. So if you're running an ATM, you might be one. If you're running an exchange, you're definitely one. Just think of it like if you were PayPal, like what PayPal does, that's kind of the easiest way to see transmission of money. And Bitcoin in most states is considered the same as money, so it's required that you get this expensive license. Not every state requires it, but each one has a different way of looking at it, and it can be very expensive. Like the fees for each government agency is somewhere between $1,000 and $50,000. You have to go there with a business plan and put up a bond somewhere between $100,000 and $2 million just to get this thing. And you have to do it in every state.
Jeez, yeah. I mean, so I know it's incredible. It's insane. So in Alaska, they came up with what's a limit. Everything you said in simple terms. If a money transmitter license traditionally costs you maybe $100,000, and you have to set that up. Well, now with the limited license, specifically for like a virtual currency business, it might only be $20,000.
Oh, nice. That's good.
Yeah. So it's developing just a different tier. But of course, the most important thing is people realize that majority of these companies don't mind registering with the state. They don't want to be illegal. They just either one can't afford the barrier to entry or they don't even know what to do. And that's something that I keep telling everybody here in Florida. But in New Hampshire, they just did away with the license altogether. So they said if you're a virtual currency, you don't need a money transmitter license. And that was a lot. That was way different as far as voting goes in Alaska, because in Alaska, the bill pretty much problem. But in New Hampshire, the votes were actually pretty tight. And you had a lot of different people, say in the banking industry, saying, man, you're opening up the door for terrorism, for money laundering. This is going to be a huge mistake. So the voting margins were actually pretty narrow on that, but it still ended up passing. And so now if you're in New Hampshire, as far as from what I understand, you don't need to register as for a money transmitter license if you're a virtual currency business.
That is amazing. I'll have to look into that even more. New Hampshire has some really interesting freedom focus, so that's really cool. And then, so you'd be able to have an ATM machine there without KYCing everyone. So yeah, there's a lot of implications for that. I wonder, hopefully they'll see like a real pickup in crypto business the same way, like if you look at Colorado when marijuana got passed to be legal there, and they saw, you know, a huge influx in tourism in all kinds of different areas. Like their speeding tickets went down, like everything changed for the better, I think, when they looked at it. So it would be cool to see some kind of study of like if New Hampshire gets some kind of benefit from making a legislation like that. Then you could take those stats and bring them to Florida and say, hey, look, there's a lot of ancillary benefits to doing something like this.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's exactly what I'm doing is I'm looking at what's good and what's bad. I mean, luckily with Florida, we're later in the game, but partly by design, right? Because we're trying to be careful and see what's going on. And we have seen what states are doing, right? And we know what not to do with New York. Right. And so that's what I keep telling people. This is what you don't want to do. And so the biggest question is not just what do we want to do, but how can we even push the envelope and stay ahead? Right. How can we really even be a leader? And so that's I'm working with the Chamber of Digital Commerce up in DC. Actually, I have a phone call with them next week about what exactly we can help to do to promote not just cryptocurrency here in Florida, but of course, one thing I learned while I was in DC was that the feds are looking at the states as much as the states are looking at the feds. So if we were able to pass something here in Florida, right, being the third most populous state and the fourth biggest economy in the whole union, right, if we pass a bill, that has a lot of weight, that has a lot of say. Right. Mm-hmm. And if we pass a positive bill, then any federal agency has to kind of look at that and say, hey, you know, if we go against that, we're taking aim directly at Florida, which is a huge state, right? So we're affecting a lot of people potentially in a negative way.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the chances are of getting, like, after you saw how the bills moved forward in Tallahassee last summer, like, how long does it take to get something moved forward, and what exactly would you want our bill to say?
So that's a hard question, right? I mean, because first of all, you never know the political climate. I mean, even from the national level, we're seeing that kind of come down to the state level, right? So cryptocurrency right now isn't exactly like the number one issue anybody's running on, right? Mm-hmm. And you also have political events that kind of shift the whole conversation and any possibility of a bill passing, right? So last session, you had the Parkland shooting. And because of the Parkland shooting, not a lot of bills passed. As soon as the shooting happened, everything stopped, right? Like dead in its tracks, and the whole legislature said, okay, we got to focus on this, mm-hmm. right? And so, and its basic principle, not that it has to be this way, but from what people who've been in the process tell me, is if you have a bill, it'll take 2 to 3 years to pass. Right. And the biggest part of that, especially with what we're doing, is one, you're educating people. Right. So if you have a new bill, you have a new ask, your biggest thing is educating everybody. Right. And then the coming year is when you really have an opportunity to pass any kind of legislation now that hopefully everybody's educated. Obviously, my goal is to get a positive bill passed as soon as possible. You know, the sooner the better. And now that it's become a campaign issue and heavily focused on by the CFO of Florida, one of our biggest issues, I think, is just going to be making sure that no bad bill passes, right? But if it's becoming a campaign issue, then that might give us the opportunity to say, hey, work with us and let's pass something this year to take care of this problem.
And don't the two people running have very opposing bills, opposing ideologies around cryptocurrency? So there is a danger of getting some bad bills?
Kind of. I mean, so Jeremy Ring has said, first of all, it's not in the CFO's purview to focus on this at all.
Okay.
And it should be on the Attorney General. And then his second point is we just need to wait on the feds, right? We don't even need to be touching this, right? And of course, about the federal argument, I would argue is wrong because we want the feds to institute good policy, and the feds are looking at the states to do that, right? So we should be actively pursuing good policy because we're literally shaping what's happening in the rest of the nation if we're able to do so. The CFO has mainly taken a negative view because of law enforcement's view of Bitcoin being used for criminal activity, which isn't wrong, right? I mean, it is a huge industry, especially down in the South Florida, Miami area, where they're figuring out that Bitcoin's being used for a lot of fraud, right? So the question isn't, although my biggest fear and what I've been educating them on is, hey, there's a lot of people who aren't criminals using this stuff, right? That's why you got to be careful when you legislate.
What kind of fraud?
So it's interesting, and I just learned about this recently, but apparently Bitcoin has just transformed the whole identity fraud industry down in like the Miami-Dade area. And with ransomware as well has 100% like increased because of Bitcoin, right? So law enforcement has only seen a kind of negative aspect, which is understandable, right? Criminals are going to do what criminals do.
Yeah.
They use cash, they use the internet, they use any available means of infrastructure available to commit a criminal activity, right? Mm-hmm. So my goal is I've been reaching out to them to learn from them, to inform them that, hey, we're looking at passing some good legislation, but we're very aware that there are bad actors, and the community is more than willing to be a part of a discussion to make sure that law enforcement has the tools necessary to combat the bad actors. Because we don't like the bad actors either, right? Because they give the good guys like us a bad name.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of legislation is it that you're trying to get passed? Like, is it a money transmission law or?
So that's something we're still working on with the various stakeholders in the industry. And so because what we've only been doing for about the past 2 to 3 months, right? So we're still relatively new. You still also have
you have made some big waves in 2 to 3 months. Really big kudos to you, Sam.
Yeah, a lot of sleepless nights. But I mean, yeah, no, I'm thankful for how forward we've been able to push the conversation just already. But the biggest thing right now is, one, you have elections in November, and then after that, session isn't till about February, March of 2019, right? So what we're currently trying to do is, before we come to the table with any specific political ask, is we're trying to make sure that we have everyone in the community involved, making sure that any legislation we do pass is comprehensive, because we really want to make sure that we cover all of our stakeholders. So I can imagine a scenario where we're looking at a money transmitter license, doing something different to that of some sort, whether it's Alaska or New Hampshire. Right, but also
I think it needs to be like, I don't really know, but what I think is that you could get past. I think trying to do something like New Hampshire and Florida is too far over. Like, no one's going to agree to have no money transmission, rules. But maybe if you could set up tiers so that it's really clear. If you're under $500, you don't need to you're not needed a license. If you're between 500 and 3,000, you're going to be a money service business. You need to register with FinCEN and do reports, but you don't need the full money transmission. And then if you're moving, just have it tiered. Like if you're moving between 3,000 and 10,000, maybe at that point have heightened KYC requirements. And then if you're moving 10,000 to 100,000 or more, then you need a money transmission license, and then you can have the bond correspond to how much money you're expecting to move. Like that way people could still benefit from maybe using a Bitcoin ATM or doing any kind of smaller transmission without having to go through all these cumbersome steps. And to get the money service business registered, that's really easy. You just submit one form to FinCEN, and I think it's like a $50 fee or something. I forget what it is. I paid it for one person, but it's not expensive. But you're letting them know what type of business you're in, and you're saying, yes, I will have an anti-money laundering compliance policy. I'm going to report certain transactions if they come in. I'm going to collect information. I'm going to know my clients. So if we had some kind of tiered thing, I think that would suit everyone. But maybe not. But
well, no, just write that out and we'll pass it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So that's and that's why we're doing what we're doing, and that's why we're just trying to get input exactly from people like you who might have different ideas. And we're just trying to be inclusive, right? We're not trying to launch any initiative against any other industry in Florida, right? We're trying to make people understand that, listen, what benefits us benefits you as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why we're right now reaching out to people in law enforcement, because they are one of the biggest pushers of any kind of negative side of cryptocurrency, right? And all they see is the negative, understandably, right?
They go and trap people on the local Bitcoins. Did you see that recent story in California? Oh my goodness.
No, I didn't. What was it?
Oh, this lady, she's known as the Bitcoin Maven, but her real name's Teresa. I forget the last name, but she was operating, exchanging Bitcoin for cash for people through local Bitcoins. And she was even paying her tax on it, but she didn't have the money transmission license, which in Florida in California, you don't need it for what she was doing. Like they've carved out exceptions for virtual currency. That's my understanding of it anyway. I haven't looked that carefully into it, but I think she thought she was okay with what she was doing and she was paying her taxes. But then a law enforcement officer told her that it was drug money that they were changing over, and she didn't. She still did the conversion for her, so they arrested her, and she was going to get 30 months in jail. But she pleaded guilty to it and handed over $294,000 cash.
No way.
Something like, I think it was 60 Bitcoins and 25 gold bars. So it was a huge civil forfeiture, and she's going to go to jail for 10 months now. Which
really,
isn't that
after
long.
handing over all that cash?
Yeah. I wonder, I was like, well, she was really like, I wonder if she had was the Bitcoin sitting on Coinbase or somewhere really obvious that she had to hand it over, or like does she have more somewhere else? I don't know, but yeah.
And and the biggest thing is one, we got to educate law enforcement, but then two, no matter what, they're going to be in the conversation, right? And so I want to have them
educate all these people. Like if someone comes to you and says that their Bitcoin that they want to trade is from drugs, either one, they're cops, so don't do it, or two, just don't. If someone's doing anything criminal, don't involve yourself in it. Like you'd have to tell them after they say something is criminal, have to say, look, I'm trying to operate a legitimate business here. I don't want your drug money.
And I hate that because, that happened here in Miami. And to me, it's just, it's really negative, and just from a law enforcement perspective, because if I give you $5 and I say I stole that $5, right? So what are you going to do? Make a law now that says you have to know where every dollar that you ever receive comes from?
Yeah, that's why the tiers would be good, because this one was over 10 grand. Yeah. That's when it gets 10 grand is kind of a big cutoff for it.
Well, and what happened to Miami is this cop had gone, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It happened, I think, back in 2017. But this cop said, hey, can I have some Bitcoin? I want to go buy drugs. Right. And the guy said, listen, I don't care what you do with it, but sure, you can have Bitcoin. And they tried to arrest him and put him in jail. Well, he ended up winning the lawsuit, right? Because the judge was like, that's ridiculous. You spent months trying to get this guy to sell you Bitcoin. It's not, if it's our responsibility, right? Obviously, we should try to be good actors, but if you have to know what every dollar that you give or buy or sell, what it's going to be used for, congratulations, you just shut down the whole financial system in the United States, right? It doesn't work that way. And to
And
put
I mean,
Bitcoin
if you
in a
look
different
at it,
standard.
it's kind of interesting too, because like, you can use a lot of things other than Bitcoin for crime. Like if I was to sell my set of kitchen knives on eBay, and someone used that for a criminal activity,
Yeah,
then
you liable?
yeah, like so it's, you know, I wouldn't be, but because we're dealing with Bitcoin, yeah, you are. So it's kind of a two-way street, or yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's unfortunate, but I mean, that's why we got to have the conversations now. I mean, we still have time before session, so that's why one of our main priorities right now is just educating to let people know, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. We want input from you because we need to know your perspective, because we're going to hear it anyway at some point, right? We want to hear it now so that we can address that, as opposed to when we're in the middle of trying to pass a bill, then we get hit with who knows what, right?
So, who do you think is going to lobby against any bills that you try and pass? Do you have any guess yet of who those?
My goal is nobody, and so that, I mean, so you never know, right? Because in the world of politics and industry, the craziest interests sometimes align with you or against you. So my goal right now is I don't want to point any finger, right? Because my goal is to make sure nobody lobbies on against us, right? Because I want to be able to show everybody that there's benefits to what we're doing for the state of Florida, and specifically possibly for their industries as well. And that any problem that you see with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies can be mitigated.
I think that's a good approach. I wonder what the banks, if they'll have any, you know, interest in it, or if they'll just let it go. But
yeah, so we're working on talking to them now as well. So that's all preliminary, so I can't talk on that too much. But the doors are open, and we are conversing with them.
Oh, I think it's just really great work you're doing, Sam, and I'll look forward to watching. And you know, hopefully, I can help or, you know, be involved in any way.
Oh, you'll be involved. Don't worry. You'll be helping us, Sasha. I guarantee that.
Oh, good. I can be your sounding board at least, anyway. But yeah. So what's next on the agenda for you?
You know, just more traveling. I'm reaching out, I believe, as early as next week. I'm actually going to Pasco County to talk to their sheriff's office.
Oh, nice.
So I'm trying to work with universities. So I got some work to do with the University of South Florida, and then possibly University of Florida up in Gainesville. I'm on the road, man. I'm ready for driverless cars to hit, because I could be doing so much more work if I wasn't having to focus on driving.
Yeah, I used to work in a sales job in Canada, and if sometimes, you know, you'd want to fly, but it's like 3 hours, you're better driving. But it was so annoying. Sometimes I was lucky my mom would drive me, and then I could just sit and do, you know, whatever I needed to do with the passengers.
That is amazing.
All right. Well, if any of our listeners or viewers, if they want to get in touch with you or support in any way, how can they find you?
Yeah, so they can just go to my website, realpolitechllc.com, and then I have my email on that website. So anybody who has any kind of opinion or wants to be a part of the process or see how they can help, they're more than welcome to go onto my website, shoot me an email. I'm friendly. I'm a friendly person. You know, I may be involved in the political process, but I'm not evil. I'm doing it for a good cause, right? And so I'm always open to anything anybody has to say, positive or negative.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'll put the website link in the like YouTube description as well, so that people can find it easily. And yeah, thank you. And we'll look forward to kind of watching as everything progresses and this whole CFO, you know, thing happens. Or yeah.
Sounds like a plan. Hey, thanks for having me on, Sasha. Really, thanks.
Oh, thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Sam. Bye.
Bye.